You're listening to the Crochet Conversations podcast. Hello, welcome back everybody.
Really glad to be back with everybody now.
Before we begin, Mel, how's your arm?
Really sore and numb. But other than that, I'm feeling pretty okay for now.
So Mel just got her second vaccine, her second jab, and she's sitting to my right. And you got jabbed in your left arm. So I'm so afraid that I'm gonna smash into her.
Pretty dangerous position here.
Okay, but I'm glad that you're able to join me today though, because I wouldn't want to have to film this episode or record this episode alone. Because today we're going to be talking about the top 10 things you need to know before you start learning crochet. And someone that just started recently, which is you, I thought it would be great to get your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many times where I feel like, if only I knew about this first, or if I had this information beforehand, that would be helpful.
And actually, that's also something I get a lot in my classes. Sometimes people drop out of classes because they say, if only you had told me how difficult, XYZ and is, I wouldn't have started.
Right.
So I thought that let's cover it now once and for all. And hopefully you'll see that it's not so difficult.
Or maybe with this information, it makes it easier, right?
Yeah,
obviously.
You're more prepared coming into learning crochet for the first time. Okay, so let's hop right in. The number one thing you need to learn before you start crochet is that you will get tired. Crochet is not a quick and easy thing. It's not something that can be completed in an hour. I mean, if you're talking about bigger projects, something just even a tank top that would take you hours and hours.
Are you just talking about my hands will feel achy?
You will be mentally exhausted and your hands will ache and your arms will ache sometimes. Because especially if you're just learning how to control tension in your arms, some people stiffen up as they work.
Oh, yeah, that's me, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
That is you. And some people hunch over, and the more focused they are crocheting, the more hunched over they become.
Yeah.
And so it's something that you will get over. You will sort of learn to train the muscles in your hands as you go along, but do know that you will get very tired as you go along. It's going to be tedious. You're going to feel like you've been working on it forever. You'll be exhausted. You get hand fatigue, arm fatigue, and it's just part of learning any craft, right? Not just particular to crochet. You could be learning a guitar, for example, and you're gonna get calluses all over your fingers.
Yeah, correct. And it's about over time, does this get better?
Do you get more benefits with it, learning and going through this difficult adjustment period? I think you definitely do. So that's number one. Number two, you will get confused. So
confused in what sense?
You would be very confused.
I'm confused about everything.
Yeah, exactly everything. You'll be confused about pattern, about yarn weights, about hook size, everything in general, how to read instructions.
I guess it's the idea that it's not something that you can just start off immediately on the bed like that without any
prior knowledge,
preparation, and all that basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not something that people. It's not like you come across it in your everyday life.
Yeah.
It's it's not like paintings or photography.
Or for me, it's not like sports.
It doesn't come naturally to you.
A ball, and I know okay, I'm just gonna dribble. You're
gonna bounce the ball.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce the ball, and it's not like I need for
for
how
example,
do I first learn how to bounce a ball by reading about it or something like that.
Yeah, so for example, if you give me a ball, I at least know I have to either throw it or kick it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, right.
Right, but yeah, I understand that it's not like that with crochet, and therefore you will be confused. And in crochet, it's a very confusing topic in general. Excuse the bells and the scuffling sound in the background. That's our little doggy Whiskey trying to escape the room. But so it's not like you encounter it in your everyday life, and it's a complicated topic to begin with, which is why we're able to have this podcast episode to talk about all the different things that make crochet so nuanced in itself.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. You will be confused, but don't panic because it's really all part of the learning process. And I think the important thing to remember is that there's no right and wrong, which we've talked about.
You always say that, yeah?
Yeah, we've talked about in other episodes. It's just what works for you. Yeah. So you sort of need to have a level of awareness of what you like and how your style is in that sense.
And also, in all honesty, if it's something new to you, if you don't try it out, you will never really know what is it that works for you.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
I mean, I have to try like from A, B, C, and then I'll be like, okay, yeah, C works better than A.
Yeah,
right?
and you have to try everything.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our point number 3, which is YouTube. And point number 3 is that YouTube is a great resource. It's a very big online resource that you can go and search up patterns and things, but it's not the only resource.
Okay.
Go into your local library, look into crochet books, go read like patterns, go onto like Ravelry, for example, follow some makers, and a lot of these like makers have their personal style. So don't learn everything from the school of YouTube only.
So my question would be, yes, could this be an issue because there's just a vast knowledge and information where I can draw from, and that will in turn make me more confused because now there's just so many things.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's also important to sort of absorb knowledge in different forms. And while YouTube is a great way because you can hear and you can see physically via a video, you can't really get that from a book. But it's important also to take in different styles because in crochet, a very big thing is pattern reading.
Yeah.
And if you're so focused and so used to watching a video, there are some students that attend my sessions and they say that without a video, they can't do a pattern.
Yeah, correct.
If I give them, I print out a physical written pattern.
They don't know how to
words.
use that, yeah.
They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to understand. They don't know how to digest what's being said.
Yeah.
Even though it could be something as a sentence could be as simple as single crochet in every stitch along. And they get confused.
Yeah. It actually is like that for me, which I totally understand because I have you, right? I
Yeah.
just need to ask you and you just show it to me and that works for me, right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't work always that way.
Yeah, so don't try and just get it visually. Try to read and understand and do it in tandem, so that one sort of supplements and like the other, and it's not just you're getting used and developing one technique of learning, and then you forget how to learn in another way.
Yeah, of course.
So that's point number 3. Moving on to point number 4, don't buy patterns immediately.
Don't buy patterns immediately.
Do not buy patterns. I think it's very tempting to, as you're learning, to immediately go online and say, oh, I like this pattern, I'm going to search patterns.
Yeah.
This is something I want to do. I want to, I'm going to learn crochet with the intention to make this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the first instinct is I want to make a project and do something, but I don't know what to do, so I immediately get an instruction manual, for example, to show me how to make a shirt,
Yes, don't do that.
Why? Why not?
Because it's very confusing and it's going to confuse you even more than you already are as a beginner. As someone who is starting in crochet, you are not going to understand the difference between a chain up 2 and a chain up 3 at the start of every row to prepare you for a double crochet, for example.
Okay.
Because certain patterns will tell you, and don't forget these patterns are written by other makers and people like you and me. And so they will have their own personal style of doing something. So for example, if they need to complete a simple row in double crochet, it could be a chain up 3 for them, but for you it could be a chain up 2.
Right.
And until you understand how that works, you're going to follow to a T, and it may not suit your personal style. So a chain up 2 for them could be because they're using a size 5 hook and their tension is slightly looser. But for people like me, and I know many of you guys out there, your tension is much tighter. You're a tight crocheter. So your chain up 2 would be way too short and it would bunch your work up in a funny way.
Yeah.
And these are not things that you would understand just by buying a pattern off the bed and looking
and then
at it.
immediately learning from the pattern.
Yeah, and you're also not going to understand how difficult or complex a pattern is. It's like a lot of times I get new students who come to class and they show me a very complicated pattern, say maybe in like a star stitch.
And you're wondering why am I starting off with this complex thing?
And I have to sort of manage their expectations in a sense that I have to sort of disclaimer at the start of every session. This is not something we're going to be able to do until session maybe 5 or 6, if we are lucky, if we are fast enough.
Yeah, and that's something that I won't realize until I actually figure out the basics first.
Yeah, and patterns are not cheap, I mean, they can be as cheap as like $2-3, but most of them can go from like 10 to 20, and more complex ones can go if you're buying a different set of patterns to make clothes, for example. The top is a cost, the bottom is a cost. I've seen like dress patterns for like $30. That's not including the material cost, and you need so much more material than you think.
Yeah, correct. I mean,
Yeah, so I would suggest you don't buy patterns off the bat. Just go and learn the basics first and think about it.
Yeah, it's the idea of having really like maybe picking up bad habits first, and the concept of unlearning all these things,
Yeah.
because I've learned it already.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's the problem with maybe trying to do something where to start off somewhere where I'm not supposed to start off at yet, right?
Kinda, I think. I think that also plays a part, but I think my concern for now initially, especially if you have no prior experience to it, is that you will be very confused, and it's going to force you to, I guess, pick up habits, like you say, that could be very, not effective and not efficient in your, the way you work and all that. And it's gonna immediately turn you off crochet, which is not what we're trying to do here.
Right, understand.
And also, I'm not for the idea of spending money before I'm not gonna buy a pair of Nike shoes if I don't even know how to walk yet. You know what I mean? It's sort of that concept.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so point number 5. Point number 5 is my personal favorite and something that I emphasize all the time, and that is to write everything down. Keep a notebook and pen in your project bag, or whatever in your project area,
My crochet bag.
or crochet bag or whatever, and write every single thing down. Documentation is key to bettering your craft, and that works for every craft along the way, crochet included. And I think I mentioned this in one of our previous episodes where we talked about
Important tools that we need, right?
Yeah, crochet tools, and I said that a notebook and a pen is so essential for me.
Yeah.
I never go anywhere without it. You will never see me crochet nowadays without some sort of pen and paper around the house. Yeah, because everything I do, every modification I make, I write it down. And of course, I would put a little note, modified this and I did this instead of this. And it doesn't have to be neat. And if you're one of those who are afraid of spoiling, quote unquote, a new clean notebook, write it on spare paper and then transfer it to the notebook when you feel confident to.
Yeah.
So I started out with a clipboard and a bunch of scrap paper.
Yeah, papers all around the place.
And it's paper clipped together, and it's just clipped to the clipboard. And it wasn't until I started getting confident with a pattern, and I know that this pattern works, and I've done this pattern many times successfully, then I transferred it into the notebook, which is something that you can do too, if you're afraid of, dirtying a pristine new notebook, which I know is, it's sort of a pet peeve for some people.
For you, yeah, okay.
Yeah, for me included actually too.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those tools that you don't think much about it, but once you start, and then at least for me, when I'm working on a stitch that I'm not so familiar with, but I've done it before, me having that notebook allows me to go back and look through that stitch again.
Yeah, and you're gonna be writing it realistically in your own words.
Yeah,
how you say it to yourself. So if you come back to it and go, what did I do here?
Yeah, I doubt anybody can read my notes.
Yeah, because it's what makes sense to you in your head, in your language, the way you say it to yourself.
Yeah.
So it's very highly personalized. It's not like a YouTube video where you watch and then they say in their way that maybe you don't understand always. You don't always understand it immediately. And just write everything down basically. The brand of yarn, what size hook you use, what material you use.
Yeah. For me, I scribble down drawings and things like that also.
Yeah,
it's not just
diagrams.
words.
Yeah, because if you don't get information via reading, and you get it better, through pictures.
Yeah.
And then you can draw it down and then
with arrows and stuff like that.
yeah, and have a little asterisk here and there to help you understand better. But all this requires you writing it down.
Yeah.
So write it down. Now, point number 6. Always wind up your yarn.
Wind up into a cake?
Into a cake, yeah. Or if it's a sky, turn it into a ball. You don't have to have a yarn winder for this. I also did talk about this in one of our previous episodes. You don't need a fancy yarn winder. Just get a regular toilet paper roll or a bottle that you don't use, an empty bottle, and wind your yarn around it.
Okay.
But it's important for you to wind your yarn before you start working with it. Don't work with it right off the ball that you get from the shop. And the reason for that is that it allows you to assess the quality of your yarn and to detect any issues in the yarn.
Okay.
And if there are color changes or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so one example would be, there are so many times I pull a yarn ball from the center, and after working maybe 2 or 3 rows, I realized that there is a big knot.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
And if
that
I had
happens.
known that prior to starting, I would have taken out that knot and maybe, removed that chunk and kept it for, I don't know, maybe to sew in my ends or whatever,
Yeah. I mean, a knot is just one thing. We have had instances where we take out and then like in the middle of it somewhere it's like a big fluff ball or something.
Yeah, and there's something wrong with the yarn.
The
or
colour is a bit off.
Yeah, so the other thing for you to assess is the color variation in it. Not especially if you're getting variegated, it looks very nice on the outside of the yarn, but sometimes in the middle it could be a different thing. You may not like the way the color changes, and winding it out allows you to go through essentially the entire length of that one yarn strand to make sure the color is the way you like it, because there's this thing where you can manipulate the yarn out of the ball, and if you want to start with a certain color, you sort of need to know where the colors are, and then you can pull out that color and start from there. Another thing is that it's very common, especially if you get mill-end packs, those big 400 gram packs.
Yeah, we talked about this before.
Sometimes by pulling out the ball in the center, you realize that the yarn is not connected. It's 250 grams ball wound into one big 100-gram skein.
It's actually more common
than you think, right?
Yeah.
So always wind up your yarn before you start, because this is a great way for you to check that everything is in good working order. And sometimes also with color variation, the outside of the ball is very nice and the inside the color fades. And we don't want that in our project, right? Unless you do, then that's fine, but at least you know it beforehand.
At least you know. That's the point.
Okay, point number 7. Crochet takes time, and I guess this mimics point number 1, but I want to emphasize just how much time it takes. Crochet is not a quick and easy art where you can sit down, like I said, within an hour and complete something, unless you're doing a small project. But it's also not as simple as just crocheting and that's the end of it. There is so much more to crocheting, like, choosing the right yarn and hook ratio and sewing in your ends and thinking about strength and structure in your work. And depending on what project you want to do, choosing the right material to match that.
Yeah, basically a lot of prep work before that.
Yeah, and all that takes time. It's not just, we are not just counting, 2 hours from start to end. We're counting the time it takes for us to sew in the ends at the end of it.
Correct.
We're talking about the time it takes us to wash and block, which can take up to 2 days sometimes. We're talking about the time pre-project before we even start.
Yeah.
To plan how much yarn we need, to go get the yarn. It's not so simple where you can just take a pen and paper and draw in front of you.
And also, I'm not the most patient person.
Actually, neither am I.
But I realized that because it's such a slow craft, and as a beginner, I get tired very easily, surprisingly. So it also takes a lot of time in that sense, where I have to rest, I have to stop, because
that's right, definitely.
I had the issue initially where I tried to rush a lot of my projects, and it didn't turn out as well.
It didn't turn out well, because you're tired.
Yeah,
and also when you're tired,
up.
Because when you're tired, also your hand maybe loosens, or you overcompensate and you grip, and then your tension is different. Or if you crochet when you're stressed, your work gets really tight.
And initially it was like that a lot for me, then I get like that I'll put it away for some time and I just won't get back to it
because you feel so demoralized, right?
Correct.
So it takes a lot of time, more time than people realize. And so when I give customers a time frame, let's say if they want like a top or shirt, and I just recently completed a shirt, a blouse, and it took me 3 full days to work at a acceptable rate. Realistically, how many hours can I crochet in one sitting? It's, I guess, all in all, if I add it together, it probably took me maybe 7 hours, but it's split up among 3 days, and it's like an hour.
It is really very fast already for your speed.
I think so too.
Honest.
It's like 1 hour breaks, 3 1-hour sessions in one day. And that's including trying to pack things up and get it mailed to you. And so when I tell people, if you want a blanket, it maybe takes me like 2 to 3 weeks, or a scarf could be maybe 2 to 3 weeks, maybe sometimes a month if I have a lot of back orders, and they'll be like, what? 3 weeks? And just churn it out.
To be honest, that's really fast already for me to do a sweater for myself. I think I took like 3 months?
3 months, yeah.
And this is like already with like no kind of much breaks in between, and I'm like physically doing this like every day.
And you were quite consistent with it also, and still it took you 3 months. And I guess going back to the earlier point when I said that YouTube is not your only resource, it's very easy to watch a video on YouTube that's like cut down or edit it down to 20 minutes and think that, oh great, I could complete this in a day.
Yeah.
You know, so now I'm gonna contact you guys and I want you to teach me how to create a sweater in one session, which is 2 hours. You know, because the video is 20 minutes, so like 2 hours should be more than enough time for you to, you know, do something. But it doesn't work that way. And I think if you absorb knowledge via YouTube exclusively, it gives you a very unrealistic view of how much time you really need to crochet. And therefore, it's so important for me to emphasize this, that something you need to know before you start crochet is that it's going to take a lot of time.
I mean, it's a slow craft for a reason, and it's not something that I've learned the hard way that it's not something that you can rush into.
Yeah, that's right.
Because at the end of the day, anything you rush is probably not going to turn out like really fantastic.
Yeah, that's right. So moving on to point number 8. Point number 8 is you need more yarn than you think. As straightforward as that. And I actually covered this in a quick questions episode previously. About how much yarn you need, and this is something I get asked all the time. If they, you know, like a student will go yarn shopping and then I'll receive texts with pictures saying, oh, I want to buy this 2 balls of yarn. Is this enough to make my, you know, sweater? Yeah. And I'll be like, ma'am, you need like 8 balls of yarn. And they're like, it's so expensive. I can't afford 8 balls because, you know, if 1 ball of yarn is $12, then 8 times $12 is so much money.
Correct. Yeah.
And people don't realize it, like how much yarn you need actually.
Yeah. And which at the end of the day, if you add up, it probably makes more sense to go out there and buy like a sweater with half the price.
Yeah, but you don't get that satisfaction. And this point is specifically for learning to crochet, because if you are a knitter, knitting takes up so much less yarn than crochet does.
Oh, okay.
But because of that, it also gives you a much thinner, smoother, untextured look. Right. Whereas crochet is chunkier, it's a little bit more, it's got more texture, it's got more body. And in general, the way crochet stitches are built requires you pull in a lot of yarn in your project. So this is specific to crochet. And if you really want us to go in depth into how much yarn you really need, I have a quick questions episode. I'm not sure where, but I will link it below. Or go to our Instagram and I'm sure you can find it there somewhere. And in that episode, I go through really specifically how much yarn you need, and I've broken it down to like 100 grams of this, 200 grams of this, 300, 400, 500, 600 onwards. So you can head over there and check that out.
I think visually, initially when I first started learning about crochet, right, a ball of yarn looks like a lot, you know, and it wasn't until I understand, like, you know, the weight of things or the length of things that you start to understand the concept of like how much you actually need to make maybe even a small scarf or something like that. You know?
That's right. And like so just to give you some like understanding, a regular scarf maybe would take you like 3 or 4 balls of yarn. And that's a lot already. Okay, so point number 9.
Oh, we're at number 9 already.
That's quite fast actually. Point number 9 is there is so much planning. There's layouts, there's measurement, there's yarn weightage, there's swatch gauges you have to do, there's pre and post measurement, which is like after you block them, what's the sizing will change obviously. If you don't know what I'm talking about, head over to check our swatch gauge episode. And there's so much measurements, especially if you're doing clothes, and you know, the length of your chain stitch is not the length of your project, and you know, depending on if you're working into the back bumps or if you're working into the main V portion of the chain stitch, your work's gonna expand, your work can shrink, and there's just so much to account for.
This is something that I also learned through the process of me making a lot of jackets and sweaters now. You know, the idea of all the prep work that I have to do and all the planning that I need to do, and it's just, you don't know how much planning it takes. You don't really know how much.
So for reference, Mel just finished a granny square, like sort of like a cardigan, and it's made up of 3 different colors. So it's like one plain dark grey granny square, there's plain light grey granny squares, there's plain blue granny squares, and there's one that's mixed, so like a multicolored one. And I think you didn't realize, correct me if I'm wrong, how much planning it took, because you need to know how you want to lay it out. So it was a lot of her laying things on the floor, you know, and swapping things.
And rearranging it, you know, does this color look better with that one? And I think my issue that I had was when Ines told me that, oh yeah, you can have multicolored squares also, and I was like, oh great, multicolor, more colors, very nice. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I made many different multicolored squares, and guess what? I had to do, what do you call that?
Sew in the
I had
ends.
to sew in the ends, and it was a nightmare. I swear.
And so that also accounts to the planning. If you're gonna change colors a lot, you're gonna have a lot of tails sticking out of your project.
Yeah, and I had some tails that weren't long enough. Oh my god.
Yeah, and all that takes time to sew in. So you need to account that if it takes you 3 days to crochet, it might take you 1 extra day to sew in your ends. So what I do is I will wait to the very end. I'll finish the whole project. I'll leave all my tails out like a Medusa. I'll pour a glass of wine.
I can't do that. Oh my gosh.
I will sit down. I'll play some nice music. I'll pour a glass of wine. I'll sit down and I'll slowly sew in my ends. At least I'm sitting in comfort.
Yeah.
With, and the drunker you get, maybe the faster
yeah,
you
maybe,
go.
yeah, right. Yeah, the funny thing is that crocheting is not the issue here. It's the sewing in the ends that is actually the most tedious for me. Right?
Which is the planning. It's just the pre and the post.
Yeah.
So if I were to divide in terms of percentage, crocheting only takes up 30%.
Yeah.
The first 30 is the pre-planning, the actual crocheting is the braidless part, and the final 30% is the planning and the
Cleaning
blocking
up of
and the
everything,
cleaning
yeah.
up and the sewing in the ends and making sure things are sturdy, and and that takes the final 30%. And the other 10% I think is probably like your own skill or your own however
So this is like my instant of if I knew this beforehand, I probably wouldn't make as many like maybe multicolored squares, and it would be more like a solid color then.
Yeah, but it's nice. It
turned out
a
nice,
center,
yeah.
And point number 10.
Last one.
The last point that you need to know, which is I think the most important point, is that there are UK terms and US terms when it comes to crochet.
Right.
Most people don't realize, especially if you are a beginner and have no prior experience, and even if you have some experience, it's not something that I figured out.
Confusing, yeah.
Yeah, so I only figured this out after a lot of trial and error, and I think I was crocheting for like a year at this point. 1 full year of crocheting.
And it was still confusing.
So to give you a understanding of what I'm saying, in the US, we have, single, double, half double, and all that we are familiar with. But in the UK, those same stitches are called something different. So a single crochet in the US terms is a double crochet in the UK terms.
Oh my goodness, and you don't even use a different name.
Yeah, and they sort of overlap the name. So an actual double crochet in US terms is a treble crochet, and a treble in the US, in the UK, it's a double treble. And there's double treble, triple trebles and all that, and it's very confusing because they use the somewhat similar names, but they refer to different things.
Yeah.
So the very first time I encountered this, I was extremely confused why some people say a double is a double and some other people refer to a treble as a double as a treble. And so I thought it was just a different way of calling it, and so I started to use treble and double stitches now in the US terms interchangeably. And that did so much damage to my projects.
Yeah, of course.
Especially as I was doing like mandalas, like round mandala circles. It made my work buckle, it didn't lay flat. No matter how much blocking I did, it couldn't get it to stretch out nicely. And until I read a book, and it said that this book is written in UK terms.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? What is UK terms? And
why is it they need to explicitly state that, right?
yeah, and luckily at the very back there was like a little annex that said, oh, UK versus US terms, and that was when it hit me. I'm like, no way. There are actually 2 different ways of calling one dang thing.
Yeah.
So a single crochet in the US terms it's a double crochet in the UK terms, and it's like this
Cannot
and
be
so
more
much
confusing.
more. It's so confusing.
Yeah.
So the last and most important point of this is really to check what your stitch pattern is written in which language first. Don't assume that if someone's from the UK, they're going to use the UK terms, because they could also do it in the US terms.
Yes, correct, yeah.
And especially if you're watching YouTube, the makers or the creators could be so familiar with what they're doing that they don't think to tell you that this is US versus UK.
They just use the terms.
Yeah, and so that really frustrates me. So what I like to do is I like to ignore what they're saying, and I like to watch the video, because I know visually what a single crochet looks like.
Yeah, correct.
So if I see they're doing a single and they say, oh, put 2 double crochets here, then I know that this is a UK term.
Yeah.
And then I have to make my adjustments that way. And it's particularly difficult if you're trying to transcribe a pattern from the US to the UK or the UK to the US or whatever, because it's even more confusing to have to remember every time you see a double, they mean a single.
A single, yeah.
Every time they say a treble, they mean a double.
I cannot. Like, remembering the terms is already one thing. To tell me there's like another way of saying it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's I don't know why.
I mean, if they're going to use another term, they might as well use an entirely different term. The confusing part is that they're using like the same words to represent like different things.
You know, that's not all. In the US versus the UK, in the US, the foundation row does not count as a first row. Whereas in the US, the foundation row is row number 1.
So for the UK, I skipped the foundation row and my next row is row number 1.
Yeah, so the foundation row is like row 0.
Oh my, row 0. Okay.
Because they say it's foundation plus 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4. So it's very easy to misunderstand and think that the foundation row is part of the stitch, and then you count it that way as part of your stitch repeat.
Yeah.
But your stitch repeat could actually be from row 2, 3, 4, 5 onwards.
Right.
And you don't include row 1.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if you are used to doing it in the US terms and you find a pattern in the UK, they will tell you row 1, but remember that row 1 is just it doesn't include the foundation.
And this is another reason why you shouldn't immediately buy a pattern off and start.
Yep,
because,
exactly. Good job.
Yeah, see? Fast learner.
Good job.
There you
Yeah,
go.
so that's what she said.
Okay, so are we done?
Okay, and for sticking around so far, I have a bonus.
Bonus.
11th point. Something you need to know before you start crochet.
Okay.
Point number 11 is that there are so many ways to do a stitch. Everyone has their own modifications, so don't get confused. Remember, as you're working with it, it is very, very important to try and modify the stitches to what suits you best.
Okay, when you say modify...
So remember how I talked about the chain up 2 versus chain up 3?
Ah, right, okay.
So that's one option. Another example could be like if you're doing the foundation chain and they tell you to chain a certain amount and you are not confident that you can chain that certain amount, don't get stuck with only doing what they say. You can overchain, like I've mentioned in the past. You can overchain your foundation and then, remove it, as long as your end product is the same. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
If they tell you, go into this particular stitch and pull up a loop, if it's difficult for you, you can modify which hole or which stitch you decide to pull up from, as long as at the end of the day
It kind of looks like what it's supposed to
you
look
have
like.
the correct number of stitches across in that row. And I think one thing I've noticed is that a lot of new crocheters would stress a lot about, I can't find, where I'm supposed to put my hook in, and I can't find where is the placement of things. It actually doesn't really matter. As long as you have the right number of stitches, that's the most important thing moving forward, because you don't want to be losing stitches or increasing stitches as you go along, right? Then you have an increase or a decrease. You're not trying to do that. You're trying to get the same amount of stitches throughout. So that's also one way you can modify. Or for example, if you're working on a granny square and you know that your tension is too tight, and in order to get it to lay flat in the corners of a granny square, if you're familiar with it, it's like 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet,
yeah.
or 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. You can choose to do a chain 3 there instead of a chain 2 if that's what works for you.
But as a beginner, is this something that like I just need to test it out myself, and how do I know what to modify and how to modify it then?
As a beginner, it's important to follow what the pattern says
First,
and look at it for yourself. Look at your work, lay it flat, try to figure out what you could do to loosen it. A good question to ask yourself is, if I adjust this pattern here in this section, will it affect the future rows? And what can I do to affect, to fix the future rows that might be affected for it?
Okay.
Or for example, if a pattern, say, for example, like the star stitch or the herringbone, and they tell you to, do it a certain way, but maybe you want a little border along the side, you can still work into the side of stitches and create a border, even though it's not part of the pattern, but it's something that you want to do, you can adjust it that way.
Okay, I see what you mean, yeah.
I can add stitches to the foundation row to create like a flat double crochet border along the side. Is something that I can do. If I want to, I don't want to start directly with a star stitch, for example, I want to have like a foundation row, I can do a row of, double crochet first or single crochet first before I start the actual pattern.
Yeah.
it really is up to your creativity to experiment.
Yeah, and I think that makes it fun. Like when I was trying to do my sweater, and then you were asking me like, okay, what do you want to add next? And I'm looking to you like all confused, and you're like, yeah, it's really up to me, you know.
Yeah,
like,
tell me what you
to,
want,
yeah.
and then we'll figure out how to get there.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Like, do I want to border? Do I want to, to make it like tighter at the ends or something like that?
Yeah, and like how your work turns out, which is why there's so many ways, and sort of this brings us back to another thing that I'm saying, that it's planning. It takes a lot of planning. You want to do your swatch gauge beforehand. You want to test out different things. So don't jump straight in to start the project.
Yeah.
Always do like a test piece, which is your swatch gauge. Have multiple swatches in different size hooks, and if the pattern tells you use a size 4 and you think, dang, a size 4 is too big, I'm going to downsize to a 3.5, go ahead and do that, as long as you have a swatch gauge before that and you know what's going to turn out.
Yeah.
Your swatch gauge doesn't always have to match the pattern. As long as you are aware of it, anything is free range.
Yep. At the end of the day, when you start doing it, it's all that matters is that you're happy with it,
Yeah, exactly. So that's point number 11.
Wow, bonus.
Okay, so I hope that you guys have enjoyed this 10 plus 1 bonus things you have to know before you start learning crochet. And if you already crochet and you've already started, then maybe these are things that you can think about. Start a discussion with us. I love to hear what you guys have to say, because it also widens my thinking, I think.
Yeah, a lot of this was like my feedback to you also about what I struggled with when I first started with my projects.
These are things that we have sort of gathered over time,
Yeah.
and especially for me in the past decade of doing this, it's something that I've sort of gathered, and and also because recently Mel started crocheting, so
Yeah.
she's been saying to me, oh my god, why didn't
should
you
have
tell
told me
me
this.
Yeah, you should have told me.
Yeah.
So I thought that it would be interesting to share with you
Yeah,
guys. If you have any
definitely.
questions or you want to, tell if I've left out anything and you think it's important for us to know, feel free to drop us a message on our Instagram. We are at crochetcrochetsg, or you can email to us actually too, right? crochetcrochetsg@gmail.com, and find us on our website www.crochetcrochet.com. And if you're in Singapore, or even if you're not in Singapore, you can still text us, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You can text us at 912-72743. And with that, we are done with this episode.
See you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye.